Welcome back. Sager Mountain living through the CTE in the Wild West. We're on to bud or cannabis stories. One of the deciding factors for us moving to the mountains was the need to become self-sufficient. We used to spend quite a bit on bud every month. We'd go through an ounce of chronic a month on the low slide, which back then was about $3 to $3.50. We had bought the ranch just a year after they made it legal if you had a doctor recommendation. Our first garden was honestly the best. When we moved, Wendy had a saved bag of seeds that we got out of a random bag of bud over the years. We had no idea what each strain was, but it was amazing. We had gotten them going late in the year. It was really sketchy back then to even have a few plants in the yard. We had somewhere in the high teens. We had shade cloth over them as well as plastic canopy over the top, which after so many years we found out that the best bud is grown under some cover up at our altitude. It makes sense because we're closer to the sun. It's a real treat to be involved in growing a successful garden. We were driving back to LA once a week to get bud for a week when we first moved up there. That was before the dispensary opened. So we started buying bud from one of the first dispensaries in Bakersfield. It was called the Kempo Kung Fu School of Natural Health. The owners were Joe and Lisa, and Wendy were like-minded in many ways, and we become sort of friends. Joe is a big advocate for cannabis due to his HIV diagnosis. He was a smaller sort of dirty hillbilly type. Lisa was a free-thinking gal from Colorado. Anyways, they had bought a 20-acre place near ours. Wendy decided after talking to them that she would have them over to look at our plants, so they arranged to come over. They came by and were saying that they needed more light, and were a little rude about thinking they were master growers. It was okay though, because at the time the cover wasn't to keep lights out but prying eyes out. About a week later, Lisa invited us over to help them trim. So we go by their place, which was an old trailer perched on this 20-acre parcel way up in the mountain. It was a great view like our parcel, but quite a bit rougher up there. It was awesome to see at first. There were about 150 plants that he had growing. Lisa was so excited for us to come by and see their plants. As we walked down the first makeshift row, we noticed that all the buds were super fat, but these plants were tiny, so I squeezed one and it was as hard as a rock. Wendy then said to them, "I think this is a male." Lisa walked over and ripped it out of the ground. Then Wendy said to her, "It's another one." So Lisa then pulls it out and then running around the garden in a panic, yelling to Joe and shaking the plants all over. Their whole garden ended up being seeded. The rock hard buds were more seeds than anything else. The plants were also short and small because they were stunted from too much sun and heat exposure. We helped them trim for a couple hours and then left. It was a bit uncomfortable knowing their whole garden was ruined. Joe was also weird and probably tripping out or on something. Can't believe I wrote this. He got out anal beads, a sexual toy, and was swinging over his head. Really proud of his wife, I guess. He had to show posters of Lisa when she did modeling. It was so funny and embarrassing for Lisa. When we got home, we did a full disinfectant to keep our crop from getting seeded and getting anything off that might have flocked on us during the bead swing. Gross. It was actually really sad for both of them. Their shop was one of two in Kern County, and they were banking on the crop to supply their shop. Our crop ended up super top shelf. Every plant, each one was so different. I can remember being in their shop with a mason jar of what I had and giving bud to them to be cool. We were never okay with selling our bud. We would give samples away for fun all the time. In desperation to keep their shop competitive, Lisa did two things. The first was to do cannabis ID cards for her shop. Babe, do you mind grabbing my wallet? It was cutting age 20 years ago to have your picture on a card. I think she was the first to do it. It was a funny card because it said the name Kempo Kung Fu School of Natural Health. Joe had thought he was a karate master. No, he was not. The second thing that she did was invest the last of her money to do an indoor at the shop in Bakersfield. She hired someone to set the whole thing up. It was an impressive system, fully hydro, with flood tables, and it took about half of the warehouse. The first time we saw it, I congratulated her on such a cool system. There were about 150 to 200 plants, and all were 2 feet tall. It was purple kush, and should have been an amazing crop. When we were there the second time, Wendy noticed a few spider webs on the plants. We both tried to expound on the scariness of spider mites to cannabis plants. Back in the day, we knew about this stuff because we're not as experienced as we are now. I can recall Lisa just blowing off the warning, and she picked the webs off and it acted like it was no big deal. This is my old card I've saved. Woo. First person to do these cards, kind of a neat thing. The third time we stopped by, we were hoping to see a huge grow of purple kush and maybe get some. It was really cool strain. It was a really good strain of it she got along with the system from a grower in LA. Both Wendy and I noticed the last time we saw the grow that there was no CO2. When you're growing with lights, the CO2 keeps the bugs out by keeping the temperature under control. We showed up wondering what happened with the bugs. When we saw the plants, they looked like web pops. There were spider webs covering everything that was green on every one of the plants. I know there was some competition back then about who knows what, so I can now feel the embarrassment when we showed up. But Lisa still picked the webs off the bud and said, "It'll be okay. We could just clean it off." I can understand her trying to be positive. She had her entire career and all her savings tied into the shop. They eventually lost the business due to spider mites. They split. Lisa passed away over HIV complications. We offered to adopt her daughter, but her mother took the girl back to Colorado. Joe was deported back to Canada. The last I heard, it's interesting to watch all the kids trying to be bud farmers. It's still farming. Plight of a farmer is a sad thing. When cannabis growing comes up while showing property, I always tell people that the sheriff said they are only looking for cartel. Small person growers are okay. 30 or less stay under the radar. Then I tell the story about what you shouldn't do. We had a Cadillac Escalade pull up to the office, which isn't rare, but this one was lowered with 24-inch rims. The older Hispanic dude got out of the ride and gave me his card. It said his company name on it, and his title, real estate broker / bail bondsman. He said he was helping his clients find some land to grow landscaping flowers. I do believe in stereotypes, and this was right on. I decided that I would show them the property way back at the end of St. Canyon, and it was remote, private, and it had easy dirt access for a lowrider. When they bought this parcel, it did not have a well. They said they were intending on trucking water from another grow they had in Arvin, but during the showing, they asked if they could take water from the creek or Caliente Creek. I told them never touch the creek water. That water was for the cows. I told them don't screw with the cowboys. They still run this mountain. For 2 or maybe 3 years, they did just that, trucked the water from Arvin and had no problems. On year 3, they made the fatal error of filling the water truck off the creek instead of driving for the water. I heard it only took 2 days for some of the ranchers to catch wind some grower was taking the cows' water. You don't do that. When the sheriff got there on the 3rd day, they couldn't arrest anyone for the massive plant grow. But while ripping out the garden, they just did notice that whoever was living in the tent and shitting in the woods was also hunting without proper tags. There was a deer and a mountain lion that were hanging in this guy's camp. They had bought a 20-acre parcel. There was plenty of room for all the plants. A makeshift camp with trash everywhere. I, to this day, don't understand the trash. They were only 3 miles from a trash transfer station. Maybe whoever was left to camp wasn't left with a car. The trash pissed me off. I don't care if you're a grower, just don't destroy the land. So the sheriff called the federal game warden, which arrested the kid for hunting out of season without tags. He got the maximum for the offense. I can't remember if it was 3 months or 3 years, But whatever, it's not a cool thing. Jail sucks. Hell, if I was looking at 3 months or years in jail, I might off myself over that. I think the judge should have made them pick up the trash. And he didn't. I was contacted by the bail bond broker about a week later after the bust. He said he was now looking to sell. I accepted the listing and then had to go make it presentable again. I can't remember how much trash we picked up, but it was just nasty to see how they were living. I got it listed and was actually really surprised that it sold again right away. The bail bondsman handled the escrow transaction as he was being the agent for the kid who handled the jail, who was heading to jail. Timelines for escrow actually became an issue for the seller as he is heading to Laredo jail. The bail bonds broker actually set this kid signing up for the day he was heading to jail so they would not have to make the 2-hour drive twice. He rushed the escrow docs and we rushed the escrow docs and Ashley met the kid, the notary, and the bail bonds broker at Popeye's Chicken on the way to jail. It's all true. I asked him if he was freaked out at the time, the kid. He said it was no big deal. All his friends were in there. I've been to jail in LA County. I would never go back. So I really don't understand that mindset. But I guess if you're shitting in the woods on a grow, jail may not be so bad. I also had to ask Mr. Bail Bond's broker, what's the deal with the money? You see, the kid had to sign off all the money from the sale went to the bail bond broker, which is unusual. So I had to ask, and the bail bonds broker said the money isn't his either. It comes from Mexico City, then it goes to Las Vegas, and then to him. So when the property sold, the money went back, I guess. Jail is a horrible punishment. They are crowded, unsafe, and really should be considered mind torture. Not just what it is to have to go to jail, but unknown what may or may not happen to you in there. I had this buddy, Seth. We were first introduced to Seth right after he bought a ranch adjacent to ours. He was also a cannabis grower and a person I got the sheriff plant info from. He always had some caretaker helping him. They were never the best sorts, and actually, that's how we met. He had just moved in, and a small fire was set on the corner of our property. We had blamed Seth's shady grower helper, but later heard a kid in our area did it. So Seth had a pretty intense grow, and at the time, a couple hundred plants was a big deal. I can remember him showing me his garden, and he had 1,000-watt sodium lights up in the air on poles like a shopping center. It was funny to me that he got away with that. You see, back in the day, there was a real gray area of how many plants you could have and who could grow. Wendy had a friend of a friend at the lake, asked her if she could align a grower to donate cannabis to try this fringe cure for cancer that she read about. See, her mother was dying of lymphoma. We had decided that it was a good deal. It was a good thing to help karma-wise. So we asked around, and Seth was the grower who came through. This is funny. As I said, we only had personal bud, weren't into selling it. So Seth donated a large trash bag, one of the black ones, full of buds. We figure about 5 pounds. The recipe to create the cancer oil takes quite a lot of cannabis to create just a small amount of the miracle oil. At the time of the above, there was no law against making this yourself, so we sort of pioneered and didn't even know it. It was so funny. While we were pulling the cannabis buds out of the bag, I grabbed the biggest one. It's untrimmed, and I grabbed a super thick stem and held up this massive bud. It was low light, and the bud had a different look to it. It had keef and leaf stuck all over it. I figured it was one on the bottom of the bag. I got Wendy's attention and held it up and then squeezed it. It was rock hard. I then said, look at this monster rock hard bud. From my perspective, it looked quite perfect. However, from the other side, Wendy said, what is that? It has teeth. I was holding up a petrified dead rat that got in the bag and rolled around in the keef and leaf. It was so funny because all you could see were 2 buck rat teeth sticking out of what seemed to be a giant bud. The hard stem was actually the rat tail I was holding. What a shocker. Still really cool, though. Seth donated 5 pounds of cannabis. The doctor gave this lady 2 weeks to live, and after a month on the oil, her cancer was considered in a full remission. It's not a super happy story. We had heard that just after being healed, she died while getting dialysis for other issues. Her doctor made a big deal about the whole thing and touted the success of the oil. Actually, her state was the first one to legalize the oil for cancer treatment and seizures. It is legal in most states now. However, it is not legal anymore to make it without a license, so it's very expensive. I know that the few years when Seth was really growing quite a bit, many people at the lake had their cancer healed. I owe my life to the oil. I have to use it for seizures and speech loss, brain freezing symptoms of CTE. That's for a different chapter I already read. Seth let us know a few later that he had encountered with a sheriff at his ranch. At that time, no one had knew for sure what was legal. The doctors were recommending to patients that they could grow up to 99 plants for themselves. There was no normality to the legality or illegality of the venture. I was always secure that I did only personal gardening, which was never warranted a door knock from a sheriff. Seth did get a visit, however, it wasn't entirely due to his garden. At the time, he had about 150 mature plants, each one about 7 foot. So, as his story goes, he had his donkey, who was always very loud. He could hear the thing a full 50 acres away. The donkey got into his garden and was chewing on his plants. He yelled out to the donkey, calling it by name and screaming at it to get out of there. He didn't know what else to do, so he yelled, "I'm going to shoot you!" He ran inside, grabbed his gun, and shot in the air. I guess at the time, Seth thought everything was okay as the donkey headed out. The donkey heeded the warning of the gunshots. Unfortunately for Seth, the new neighbor heard all of this and figured Seth just shot and killed somebody. They called the sheriff, and when they arrived, Seth told them the donkey story. The officer insisted he check the place after seeing the donkey. And checked the place, and after seeing the donkey and guarded, he figured no one was murdered and left. This, however, was almost too much for Seth to bear, as this cop just eyeballed his 150 plant grow with giant 1,000 watt sodium lights 20 foot in the air. I would have never called the sheriff on myself, but this seemed to be the answer for Seth. He was fun. According to Seth, he called the watch commander, and whoever that was informed him that they are only looking for cartel, and says small garden wasn't a problem for now. He also said they knew about everyone's growing on the mountain. I knew that to be true. They fly over gardens every year and picture them. I never cared having a small personal one. The sheriff actually told Seth that if he was smart, he would split the garden into a couple smaller ones. Guess that looked better from the air. Now the law is you can grow 6 if you have a medical card, and you could grow for up to 6 people. So 36, better to say under 30. A couple of years earlier, when growing over 12 wasn't so legal, there was this neighbor who came to me to sell his ranch. He had been recently raided by the county sheriff and was looking to sell. Over the years, we had come to call him pork chops. No joke, every time we would go over to this guy's place, he was cooking pork chops. We showed up one time at like 9 a.m. and guess what? We were offered pork chops and eggs. Seriously, when we were inspecting it, the kitchen had pork chop grease or film on everything. I actually think he ate pork chops for every meal. It was like 5 times we were offered pork chops. So the name, it now stuck. It was really uncool what the sheriff did to this house. During the time, the sheriff just started to raid people for growing too many plants. There were no fine or jail time, but they thrashed this manufactured home that was already not to the best shape. Under the guise of looking for drugs, they took Chop's own tools and cut out the walls of his bathroom, then took his gun safe out and used Chop's sawzall to cut and pry it open. What was so funny to Chops was there was nothing in there, just a nice safe. Bummer about the ruined safe, though. Selling the property was really interesting because we kept getting calls for people searching it on Google Earth. At the time, Google Earth was just getting popular, and so many people called up asking about the giant circles all over the 30 acres. I had to tell people they were large potting bags for growing bud. The bags themselves held approximately 200 gallons of dirt. All of these bags were just filled with native soil, not so good for growing. Chops had always had a caretaker who managed his little operation. Usually they would be people from off the street, usually with substance problems. At the time of the sale, he had already had a handful of caretakers come and go, but none remained. In escrow, everything went as expected. We had to fix the pipes the sheriff broke just as under the house, but everything went smooth until we were about ready to close. Apparently, years back when Chops first acquired the place, he had a caretaker that really wanted to. He had a caretaker who he really wanted to entice to say. So he added this guy to the title of the ranch. When I asked Chop where this dude was, he said probably on the streets in L.A. I told Chops that without this guy's cooperation and notarized signature, the deal is dead. I said, might as well give the guy $5,000 or something to sign. He said he thinks he knows about where the guy sleeps, so he was on a mission. I don't know what transpired, but old Chop got that signature and we closed. At one point, the county had a planning department organize an ordinance for the taxation and regulation of illegal cannabis industry in Kern County. It was a very exciting time for everyone because of my real estate involvement with the county. I decided to investigate what was happening and also put my opinion into play. When I was at the county, I was involved in a planning general services administration issue. This is where I met Cheryl. Now, fast forward a handful of years later, Cheryl was the director of planning and the one charged with writing the law. I scheduled a meeting with the planning department. When I showed, there was Cheryl and two others from planning, county lawyers, myself, representing Sagamore Properties, and Seth. Yeah. Cheryl said she went ahead and invited other concerned citizens from my area. I was pushing for a light-size minimum for growing as I sell ranches, and it makes sense. I was really funny because Cheryl said, please don't tell me anything or show me anything that you're currently doing related to cannabis, because she didn't want to witness anything illegally or possibly illegal. So, of course, Seth immediately opens his notebook and starts to show off massive pictures of his garden. It was really funny to see the lawyers' faces. Having worked for the county and now being on the other side of it, I found it humorously satisfying watching everyone maintain or attempt to maintain professionalism amidst Seth's picture books. I couldn't help but laugh. I said to Seth, nah, she said not to show that. He replied that they needed to see his garden and prove or tell him what he needed to build to make greenhouse status. It was fun. It was a fun formal hour. At that meeting, I was able to get the size adjusted from 5 acres to 20. Who is to say if being a legal farmer would have been good or not? The county voted no on the legalization measure. It was really ridiculous that the board of directors voted no when the county is in such bad need of revenue. And more so, they wasted a huge amount of the planning department over the investigation writing the cannabis ordinance. One more wasted time, money blunder for the Kern County of Kern. It was sad to have other friends lose everything over the ordinance being voted down. It was really uncool how the county got everyone excited about the possibility of full legalization, they voted down and therefore inflict strict guidelines. Seth's story ended in a tragedy. We now have his dog, Mr. T. He was the Rottweiler that survived the fire, lived through the flames. This is the story how we adopted Seth's dog. Seth had gone to a bar in Long Beach. He said there were two black guys at the bar that were giving him bad looks. They jumped him, knocked him down, and were beating on him. He said it was like slow motion as he grabbed a bottle and cracked one of them over the head with it. The cops showed up, and even though Seth got jumped and the two black guys said it was their fault, Seth got arrested. The two guys who jumped him thought he was someone else. They didn't want to press charges for being struck by the bottle. However, the DA and prosecutor decided to press charges on her own accord. Seth was looking at possibly doing a lot of time. They were trying to get him for assault with a deadly weapon and attempted murder, I think. It was ridiculous. That lasted for months, the agony of this charge. At this time, I was dealing with debilitating symptoms of CTE and contemplating taking my own life. I can remember talking with Seth about how hopeless life had become. He was feeling the same way about his current bullshit. For me, I had no idea of how hopeless he was feeling, but looking back, he didn't even plant his garden for the year, and that was his livelihood. I wish I would have been there to help him. He took his own life over the fear of jail. The horrible irony came later when I met Seth's mother at the property. Apparently, the DA had dropped Seth's case and never informed him. In my mind, his death is on that prosecutor. I will say one thing. His death helped me to stick around. I guess he took on that demon for both of us. We adopted his 2 Rottweilers. Snoop Dogg was mauled by coyotes a few months later, but Mr. T lived through the fire on the ranch. Mr. T was featured on Fox News and CNN for his heroic survival of the fire, a fire that was started on Seth's old property by the next girl who bought the place. So crazy ironic. Seth was a good person. I'm sure he is in a better place. Great guy. I gotta take a break on that.